The silence of the immense chamber was a physical presence, a heavy blanket woven from dust, time, and profound abandonment. It pressed in on Kalen and Alara as they stood upon the grated catwalk, two small figures dwarfed by the cyclopean scale of their surroundings. Below them, the floor of the cavernous hangar stretched out like a frozen sea of polished, dark metal, its far shores lost in an ocean of shadows. The monolithic containers, arranged in rows with unnerving precision, were not mere boxes. They were sepulchres, ironclad tombs for whatever colossal secrets the ancients had seen fit to store in the mountain's heart. From the hornet's nest to the dragon's maw, Kalen murmured, his voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the vast stillness. His gaze was locked on the tracks below. They were not the marks of wheels or treads, but brutal, gouging scars, as if a colossal beast had dragged its quarry or its own wounded body across the unyielding floor. The metal along the edges of the grooves was curled and shimmering, testament to the immense friction and heat generated by the passage. And they were fresh. The dust of ages had been violently disturbed, not settled. A dragon would be a familiar terror, Alara countered, her voice tight. She clutched her new white wand, its frost-blue crystal a stark point of color in the gloom. This feels different. Colder. It speaks not of hunger, but of purpose. A purpose we do not understand. Her scholarly curiosity warred with a palpable unease. She leaned over the railing, her eyes tracing the path of the tracks as they disappeared into the darkness on the far side of the chamber. Purpose or not, it's big enough to have left those marks, Kalen stated, his pragmatism cutting through the awe. And we are standing on a very exposed perch. We need to get to the floor. He found a service ladder built into the side of the catwalk's support struts, identical to the one in the maintenance shaft. As he began his descent, the sheer drop below gave him a dizzying sense of vertigo. The air grew colder, thicker, carrying the scent of dormant machinery and a faint, acrid smell like burnt wiring. Alara followed, her movements nimble despite her robes. I must confess, she said, her voice floating up to him. This is a far cry from the archives at Silverwood. The dust here feels metallic. It clings to everything. Better than blood, Kalen grunted, his boots finally touching the solid floor with a resonant clang. The sound was unnervingly loud, a single stone dropped into a bottomless well of silence. He waited for Alara, his hand resting on the hilt of his family's sword, his other near the grip of the Sunreaver. Every shadow seemed to writhe with imagined threats. Once they were both on the floor, the true immensity of the cargo containers became apparent. Each one loomed over them like a sheer cliff face, their gray metal surfaces cool and impassive. They walked between the rows, their footsteps the only sound, their path dictated by the violent scars on the floor. What could they have possibly stored in these? Alara wondered aloud, running a gloved hand over the seamless surface of one of the containers. There were no hinges, no locks, no visible means of entry. Siege engines? The components of a fortress? An entire library of stone tablets? Or an army of those sentinels? Kalen added grimly. Let's hope they remain sealed. The drag marks led them on a winding path through the silent maze. They passed dozens of the monoliths, all identical, all sealed. Then they saw it. One of the containers ahead was breached. Its front face was not opened, but torn asunder, a jagged maw of ripped and twisted metal gaping open. The edges of the tier glowed with a faint residual heat that Kalen could feel even from a dozen paces away. Whatever had been dragged had been ripped from this very box. The work of a colossal can-opener, Kalen muttered, drawing his sword. The screech of steel leaving its scabbard was a piercing shriek in the quiet. Alara raised her crystal staff, its blue light flooding the interior of the ruined container. The light revealed not a trove of weapons or a dormant machine, but a single, strange object standing in the center, bolted to the floor. It was a metallic effigy, a suit of armor crafted for a giant, 10 feet tall even in its crouched posture. It had 2 powerful, piston-driven legs and 2 massive arms ending not in hands, but in complex, pincer-like claws designed for gripping and lifting immense weights. A cage of reinforced metal formed the torso, and at its heart sat a single, vacant seat surrounded by levers and strange, glowing runes. Its head was a thick dome of that same unbreakable green glass Alara carried a shard of, now cracked and crazed. It was a golem of steel and wire, but it was hollow, waiting for a pilot. "By the Allfather's forge," Kalen breathed, stepping cautiously inside. "Is this a weapon? A siege walker?" "I do not believe so," Alara said, her scholar's instincts taking over. She moved closer, her staff's light playing over the intricate machinery of the limbs. "See the design of the claws? They are for manipulation, for heavy labor. And these conduits," she pointed to thick, bundled cables running like metallic tendons along the arms. "They suggest a transfer of power, not the projection of it. This is a tool. A device for their artificers to move these containers, perhaps." Kalen grunted, unconvinced. "A tool that can rip a man in half is a weapon, Alara, regardless of its maker's intent." His boot kicked something on the floor. He knelt and picked it up. "It is a work manifest," she translated slowly, her brow furrowed. "A log of the machine's tasks. It repeats the same entry thousands of times. Cargo transfer. Unit 734 to Bay Gamma. Status nominal. But the last entry is different." She paused, her eyes widening. "It is a single, blaring rune. A warning. Containment breach. Biohazard protocol engaged. Unit hostile. Autonomous sentience detected." A cold dread settled in Kalen's stomach. "Autonomous sentience? A thinking machine," Alara confirmed, her voice low. "A golem with a mind of its own." Before Kalen could process the terrifying implication, a deafening screech of tortured metal echoed from the far end of the hangar, from the direction the tracks led. It was the sound of 1,000 blades being dragged across stone, a sound of immense weight and grinding, relentless motion. They both spun around, peering out of the ruined container into the oppressive darkness. A single, baleful red light ignited in the distance, like a malevolent star. Then another and another, forming a crude asymmetrical cluster. The grinding noise grew louder, closer. A hulking shape began to resolve itself from the gloom, a monstrous silhouette moving with a shuddering, unnatural gait. It was an abomination of twisted metal, a hideous amalgamation of parts scavenged from the other containers. A chassis of girders and plating formed a body, lurching forward on mismatched legs, one a thick pillar, the other a tripod of scavenged struts. It dragged a massive, half-torn sheet of hull plating behind it, the source of the noise and the tracks. Wires and conduits hung from its form-like entrails, sparking intermittently. Its head was a block of machinery with a cluster of red optical sensors, and its primary weapon was a massive industrial claw, torn from a loading crane, that opened and closed with a hungry, metallic clack. "That," Kalen said, his voice dangerously calm, "must be our hostile unit. The scrap golem lumbered into the faint ambient light, its red eyes fixing upon them. It let out a shriek of synthesized static and charged, its heavy footfalls shaking the very floor. "Alara, the joints!" Kalen yelled, raising the Sunreaver. "If it's a machine, freeze its workings!" He fired. A bolt of pure, searing sunlight erupted from the crossbow, striking the golem square in its torso. The energy blast blew a fist-sized crater of molten slag in its makeshift armor, but the monster barely slowed. It was too big, its components too crudely assembled for one precise shot to disable it. Alara needed no further prompting. She stepped forward, planting the butt of her staff on the ground and leveling her new white wand. Gelida Mors, she incanted, though the words were a formality, a focus for her will. She pressed the stud. A lance of absolute cold, a beam of shimmering, pale blue energy, shot from the crystal tip. It struck the golem's primary leg joint. There was no explosion, no violent impact, only an unnatural, spreading frost. The thick metal of the joint groaned in protest as its temperature plummeted hundreds of degrees in an instant. It became brittle, crystalline. The golem took another lurching step. With a sound like a cracking glacier, the supercool joint shattered. The creature staggered, its leg buckling, and it crashed to one knee with a titanic impact that sent shudders through the floor. It was wounded, but not dead. Its optical sensors swiveled, locking onto Alara. The massive crane claw on its arm swung around, scything through the air with terrifying speed, aimed directly at her dot. "Shield!" Kalen bellowed, activating the gorget around his neck. A shimmering, hexagonal barrier of golden light flared into existence just in front of him. He lunged, pushing Alara behind him as the colossal claw struck the barrier. The sound was a deafening crang. The force field flickered violently, colors shimmering across its surface under the immense strain. Cracks like splintering glass spread from the point of impact. Kalen's boots scraped against the metal floor as he was driven back several feet, the sheer kinetic force of the blow jarring him to the bone. The gorget's energy barrier held for a precious second, then shattered with a sound like tinkling chimes. The golem's claw, its momentum spent, scraped to a halt inches from his face. The creature roared its static fury and began to heave itself up, trying to rise on its one good-legged dot. "Again!" Kalen roared, firing another bolt from the Sunreaver. This time he aimed for the cluster of red eyes. The shot went wide, searing a molten trough across the golem's shoulder. Alara, recovering her balance, raised her wand again. She didn't aim for another joint. She aimed for the claw, which was already drawing back for another strike. The beam of frost played across the complex nest of pistons and wires at the claw's wrist. Thick rime spread across the machinery, locking it solid. The golem tried to swing, but the arm was frozen in place. It fought against itself, its own immense strength becoming its enemy. With a series of shrieking groans, the internal mechanisms of the arm tore themselves apart. The great claw went limp, hanging uselessly at its side. Now it was crippled. Maimed. Kalen saw his chance. While the machine was distracted, trying to process its new injuries, he sprinted forward, sword in hand. He dodged beneath the flailing, useless claw and slid across the floor, coming to a stop beside the creature's kneeling form. He looked for a weakness, a vital point. He saw a thick bundle of power conduits, the beast's very lifeblood, running from its torso down to its remaining leg. He raised his family's broadsword, its rusted steel looking pitifully inadequate for the task. He poured all his strength into a single, desperate, two-handed swing. The blade bit deep into the bundle of cables. Blue-white energy erupted from the wound. The air filled with the sharp smell of ozone as the golem convulsed violently. A wave of raw power coursed through Kalen's sword, up his arms, and threw him backward. He landed hard, his armor clattering, his entire body tingling as if struck by lightning. The scrap golem shuddered one last time. Its red eyes flickered and died, plunging their section of the hangar back into gloom. The hulking metal monstrosity collapsed, its final crash echoing through the vast chamber like the fall of a titan. Then, silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Kalen pushed himself to his feet, his ears ringing. His sword arm felt numb. He looked at his blade. The edge was blackened and pitted where it had cut the cables. Alara rushed to his side, her staff's light a comforting presence. "Are you injured?" "Just electrified," he managed, flexing his fingers. "But alive. Thanks to your ice wand. And your timely intervention," she conceded, looking at the monstrous pile of scrap they had felled. "A thinking machine. It was salvaging parts to repair itself. To build itself anew." Kalen looked past the golem's corpse, back towards the darkness from which it had come. The trail of destruction, the massive drag marks, continued on, leading deeper into the heart of the hangar. The golem hadn't been dragging that sheet of metal for armor. It had been hauling it from somewhere. It wasn't just repairing itself, Kalen said, his eyes narrowing as he understood. It was building something. Or unblocking something. That trail doesn't end here. They had survived the Guardian. Now they had to follow its path into the shadows, to discover what secret it had been so determined to reach.